Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, Congestion Revenue Rights Auction Efficiency for Track 1B. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portions of the call. I will provide instructions on how to ask a verbal question at those times. If you require technical assistance, please send a private chat to the event producer via the chat panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen, or you can call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Radha Madrigal, Senior Client Trainer. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the changes coming with the implementation of the Congestion Revenue Rights Auction Efficiency Track 1B initiative. Before we get started, we'll do a quick round of introductions so you know who you're speaking with on this side of the phone. My name is Radha Madrigal, and I'm in the External Training and Readiness Department.
Perry Servideo in Policy.
Jim McLean, CRR Team.
Jacob Fox, CRR Team.
Anthony Brown, CRR.
Yuan, Power System Technology Development Team.
Thank you. So that's those of us that are on this side of the phone. We thank you for being with us today on this Halloween morning. Hopefully we can get this done short and sweet, and then you can move on with whatever festivities you might be doing today. In an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted on our website so that you can review it in the future, and for those who are not able to join today's call. For those of you who are following along on the call, these slides were posted this morning. They're posted on CAISO.com and can be found on the Release Planning page under the Independent 2018 Releases, or I've also placed a link in the calendar entry for today's call if that's easier for you to navigate to. And they will eventually make their way to our Learning Center under New Modules. This call is being recorded, so that is where the recording of this presentation will be in a couple of business days as well. Today we'll be discussing the purpose of Track 1B of the CRR Auction Efficiency Initiative. We'll go over some background, the timeline, what's changing with settlements, reporting, and BPMs, and how your organization can prepare for these changes through our market simulation activities. We'll start with the purpose for this initiative. There are two main aspects of the Track 1B initiative. The first is to reduce the amount of system capacity that is released in the annual allocation and auction processes from 75% to 65%. This change was approved by FERC with an effective date of September 24th. The second element of the initiative is to implement settlements enhancements to allocate available congestion revenue collected in the Integrated Forward Market, or IFM. Our proposal is to fund CRR payments solely based on the day-ahead market congestion revenue and revenue from counterflow CRR holders, rather than relying on the CRR balancing account to make up any revenue insufficiency. Under this proposal, if we didn't collect sufficient revenue to pay net prevailing flow CRRs held by a CRR holder, we would scale the payments to all CRRs that have net flow in the direction of congestion on that constraint. We would not scale payments due from net counterflow CRR holders resulting from congestion on the same constraint. This proposal allows CRR holders to consistently net prevailing and counterflow CRRs against each other. So why are these changes needed? For a number of years, CRR auction revenues that are allocated to load-serving entities were on average $130 million less than the congestion payments received by entities purchasing these CRRs. In early 2017, the ISO began its initiative to address CRR auction efficiency. The ISO is concerned about the large CRR payments made to the holders of auction CRRs in comparison to the auction revenues collected when releasing the CRRs through the auction. The intent behind this policy is to reduce the shortfall or difference between the auction revenues and congestion payouts. Now let's review the timing of these changes. The reduction in system capacity released in the annual allocation and auction processes from 75% to 65% took place on September 24th. This filing was submitted to FERC on October 1st, and we have requested that the Commission act on an expedited basis. We have requested the Commission issue an order by November 9th that accepts our latest tariff revisions with an effective date of January 1st, 2019. The reason we asked for expedited treatment of this item was to ensure that market participants have certainty regarding how CRRs acquired through the 2019 annual auction will be settled prior to the November 13th, 2018 deadline for submitting bids to that annual auction. We will have market simulation for the settlement provisions from November 5th to November 28th, and the settlement enhancements will be activated in production on December 28th, 2018 in preparation for the January 1st effective date. Settlements is the primary area impacted by the CRR 1B changes. With CRR 1B, we will calculate offset megawatts for netted CRRs per portfolio, per constraint, or contingency case per hour. First, we'll calculate each CRR portfolio flow proportion of the netted prevailing flow to all portfolios' netted prevailing flow on a constraint. We'll call this the alpha. Then we'll calculate the difference between the IFM flow and CRR flow to determine the CRR flow difference, or CFD. We'll calculate the netted CRR portfolio offset megawatts by multiplying the alpha and the CFD. After this, we'll calculate the netted CRR portfolio notional, offset, clawback, and circular scheduling revenue values. These will be aggregated at the daily level on your settlement statement. The hourly values will be in CMRI and OASIS. We have a few charts to help you visualize these changes, so let's walk through them. CRR 1B proposes to evaluate day-ahead constraints to determine if enough revenue was collected to pay out the full notional value of the CRR. If there was a shortfall in the congestion revenues collected, as illustrated by this image, there are additional calculations that occur. First, CRR 1B determines the effective CRR flows on those constraints in that hour as a percentage of the total flow. In this image, the breakdown is showing 3 CRR holders, each holding 1 CRR that places flow on the same constraint. CRR 1B then scales back the payment to those effective CRRs by allocating each CRR its portion of the shortfall. This diagram here shows how the appropriate percentage of the shortfall is allocated to the corresponding CRR. The day-ahead market will collect a surplus when the day-ahead market settled flow is greater than the congestion revenue rights settled flow on a constraint. CRR 1B proposes to evaluate day-ahead constraints to determine if congestion revenue was collected to pay out the CRR notional value, in other words, a surplus. If surplus revenues are collected, they are paid out to the CRRs using the same scaling methodology. There will be daily and monthly settlement of CRRs. The daily CRR settlement value is based on the results of constraint-based calculations. The hourly offsets, which can be deficits or surpluses from available constraint-specific funds, are used in calculating the daily settlement value in Charge Code 6700. The reason we have this is to allow for excess daily surpluses to offset deficits on other days of the month. Speaking of charge codes, there are updated versions of the draft configuration guides available on CAISO.com. They were posted on October 19th. You'll find them on the release planning page under the heading for the Independent 2018 release. There's a section called Draft Settlements Technical Documentation where you'll find this and other charge codes related to CRR services, and I have a link to these documents at the end of the presentation as well. This image here shows an example of the daily netting of the surplus and shortfalls up to the notional value by CRR and constraint. At the end of each month, daily surplus and deficits per constraint are settled in Charge Code 6701. If we have collected congestion revenue above and beyond CRR holders' constraint-specific entitlements for the month, these will be allocated monthly to measured demand in the new Charge Code 6706. This image here shows the monthly netting of surplus and shortfalls up to the notional value by CRR and constraint. We've shared these images to help paint a picture for you. For those who would like additional explanation, there's an excellent example of the proposal to scale CRR payments at the end of the FERC filing. I've included a link to the filing in the reference section at the end of the presentation. Now, before we move any further, let's take a pause here for a question break. Bob, can you tell me if we have any questions in queue, or can we align people in queue now?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to place yourself into the question queue, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You will then hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and your question. Once again, #2 will indicate that you have a question. I am currently seeing no questions in queue at this time.
Okay, let's move forward. Now let's review the reporting changes. Changes to CRRs also means that we'll have additional information available in CMRI and OASIS. There will be 2 new daily reports. In CMRI, the CRR Revenue Adjustment Report will provide hourly data related to CRRs and transmission constraints. In OASIS, the CRR Aggregated Revenue Adjustments will provide hourly notional values and offset values aggregated over all CRR IDs. The CRR Revenue Adjustments Report will be available from the post-market menu in CMRI. The list of expected data elements are shown on the slide here. I'm not going to read each one to you, but I do want to point out a change related to CRR type. For obligations, the CRR type will be identified as aggregate, or AGG, to reflect this aggregation, while the option type CRRs will retain their original CRR type. The new CRR type of aggregate represents the aggregation of all obligation type CRRs held by a CRR holder for a given transmission constraint. This concept is explained in our business requirements document in BRQ 28A, which is a new BRQ, and I have a link to the business requirements document at the end of this presentation as well. For OASIS, the CRR Aggregated Revenue Adjustments Report will be available from the CRR menu. The report is currently expected to include the items here, the data elements that you see listed on the screen. I did want to mention for the last item there that says total offset value. Here you'll see a positive offset value showing a surplus, or a negative offset value will equal a deficit. Now we're going to briefly review the list of BPMs that will be changing with this initiative. The primary BPM of interest will be the CRR BPM, which will have the majority of the formulas for the CRR 1B calculations. These formulas will be added in an appendix that the ISO is currently working on. The next big one will be in the settlements and billing category, with all of the changes to the charge codes and configuration guides, and I've listed those out here for you on the slide. As I mentioned earlier, the draft version of these configuration guides is available now for you to take a look at. They're nice and redlined so you can see all of the changes, and I've included a link to those in the reference section as well. The next thing we'll discuss is market simulation. Market simulation will begin on Monday, November 5th, and conclude on Wednesday, November 28th. This market simulation will consist of unstructured scenarios, meaning that market participants don't have specific tasks or requirements to input data. However, the ISO will generate market data for specific trade dates in order to initiate settlement statements for your review and analysis. The market simulation plan for the independent 2018 release, which CRR 1D is a part of, is also posted on the release planning page. Now I've gotten to the end of the slide presentation, so Bob, if you wouldn't mind doing another poll of the audience to see what questions they might have.
Hello. As we move to the Q&A again, please press #2 if you do have any questions. Again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. And it looks like we do have a question. Caller, go ahead. Your line is unmuted. Please state your name and question.
Hello, this is Rich Kranz, DWR. Just a clarification. I should have rung in earlier, but I missed the little window. But when you mentioned that the scaling would be done for payouts, but that I thought I heard you say that the scaling would only be done in one direction and the counterflow wouldn't be scaled. Is that correct?
Whoa. So this is Perry. The scale. So what we do is we first net the CRR positions that a holder might have on the constraint, and then we scale. And that scale after the netting, the scaling is only in the one direction. So if you do have counterflow on the constraint, we first give you all of the credit for that counterflow, and then we scale everyone. Does that make sense?
Okay, but so if two different participants had the same counterflow, but only one had flow offsetting some of that counterflow, the remaining person would not have their counterflow scaled. So their counterflow would have a different value than or it's going to have the same value.
So I don't know value, but like payout or charge, it would have a different charge. But again, once you go to the route of netting, you're not directly comparing two different people's counterflows. It's the net position on the constraint is treated as scaled in the prevailing direction.
Okay, I think I get what you're saying. Thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions at this time. Again, if you do wish to ask a question, please go ahead and press #2 on your telephone keypad.
All right. The end of the slide deck contains reference material. And Bob, did I hear you? Was there somebody else?
No, I was just going to say there were no further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. So here's a list of the various links that you can take a look at. You'll see a link to the BRS, which was recently updated, along with a link to the filing we submitted on October 1st. As a reminder, you'll find a great example of the scaling proposal as attachment I, which is the last 6 pages of that filing. There's a link to the draft settlement technical documentation that was also updated recently. And there's also a link to the stakeholder initiative page, which contains all of the documents related to the policy and tariff development for this initiative. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, these slides are posted on CAISA.com and can be found on the release planning page under the independent 2018 releases or in the calendar entry for this call. And they will also eventually make their way to the Learning Center under new modules, which is where you'll also find the recording for this session in a couple of business days. Thank you for your participation in today's call, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for joining today's event. The call has now concluded. You may disconnect.